Did you see that clip of Gwyneth Paltrow learning in real time that she was in Spider-Man Homecoming?
No. Oh, I found it. She is so out of touch. She has no idea what's going on around her.
I'm of two opinions on this, right? Like, on one hand, you can sort of sympathize with her because Marvel and Disney, they make those movies like basically back to back to back to back. Like, they're always just bringing in people randomly for like quick shooting dates. And some of the actors don't even know where their stuff is going to pop up in the final movie. Like that happened in both Infinity War and Endgame. But it is kind of funny to think that like she was so disconnected from the whole process that she wasn't even totally sure what movie it was going to be in at all.
I love how she's convinced she's not in Spider-Man.
Yeah. Or that she seems confused that like Spider-Man is even in one of the Avengers. Or is they even part of that?
They have like scenes interacting with each other though in Endgame. So she must know now.
She must have thought that like it was all part of the bigger build up to either Infinity War or Endgame. But it is kind of funny, but it's also like I can see how her not knowing that would totally irritate fans, especially those who feel that she's one of the less passionate people involved in those projects.
I can definitely say that it kind of taps into her goop persona where like she's flaunting like
very much
pseudoscience products and stuff like that.
All it really serves to do is make me want to watch that Jon Favreau show even more. Or it's kind of like a spiritual sequel to the movie Chef that he did a few years ago when he was trying to take a break from big budget Hollywood filmmaking and he just wanted to make a little movie with some friends. And it turned out to be great and like a total love letter to, you know, the good life and eating good food.
Did I ever tell you about how my buddy and I went on like a week-long search for the right Cubanos after watching that movie?
No, you didn't, but that sounds great. I would definitely have been in on that if I was aware it was going on.
Yeah, so we ended up trying a couple places. Some of them were just like, is this really all the sandwich is? And the other places were like, wow, this is really good, but I don't know if this is authentic or not.
Right.
So that's always the dilemma. But yeah, after watching that movie, we just like couldn't just wait to get our hands on an actual Cubano and just taste what they're tasting.
Of course, we've started talking about food again, which always gets us off on a tangent. So,
all right, let's start.
Hello, welcome back to the Extra Buttery Podcast. This is episode 51, our 11th episode of 2019. Thanks very much for coming on back and joining us again. This time on the show, we've got a lot of big budget movies to talk about, or at least two of them. Godzilla, King of the Monsters, and the new, and perhaps the last, X-Men movie, Dark Phoenix. And in between, we'll also touch on the new Olivia Wilde directorial debut, Booksmart, and a couple of TV shows. We're going to be getting into Good Omens on Amazon Prime and Chernobyl on HBO, both miniseries, both targeting very different audiences, but we'll explore a little bit of that as well. But coming to you from Toronto, my name is Robert Snow, and joining me from Vancouver is my co-host Jason Chen. How's it going?
Fine, good. How are you?
Pretty good. It's finally feeling like summer here in Toronto. Actually, like above 25 degrees.
You know what I don't miss about Toronto? The humidity.
Yeah, it does get pretty humid here.
Vancouver gets pretty warm, but it's a very dry climate, I find, even though we're right next to the water. So it's okay. It's really nice here in the summer. So you should come by and swing by to the West Coast again.
Yeah. Well, last time I was there, it was November and it was rainy. So I didn't get a full experience. But
well, some would argue that's the full Vancouver experience.
Oh.
But you got an experience of a different kind with Godzilla.
Yeah. So
Godzilla!
We stopped this Ghidorah. We stopped them all.
Is there another creature that might stand a chance against him?
My God.
I remember you writing up the original movie in this sort of reboot franchise, if that's what you want to call it. Like, I'd recommend anybody listening to this episode to go back on Kinetoscope and check out Jason's review from 2014, because he gets into like, you know, what it's like to grow up with Godzilla as a character, and that's actually like an interesting way to get into King of the Monsters, because from beginning to end, this movie is definitely trying to get more in touch with the spirit of the original Godzilla. It doesn't really get all the way there, but it's definitely a lot more of that sort of World Wrestling Entertainment, WWE in latex monster suits kind of thing.
As you know, Mark Kermode is one of my favorite reviewers, and he called this wet Transformers. Is that accurate?
Did he call it wet Transformers like endearingly, or was he being a little bit annoyed?
No, derisively.
Okay.
He didn't like it, but I gather from you that you enjoyed it than I think critics, but it depends on what you're looking for going to this film, right?
Very much so. And I can see, like, normally I do agree with Mark Kermode. I really like his stuff as well. But, I think this is one where I might diverge from him a little bit because, a lot of critics certainly were pointing out that the biggest failings of most of these modern day Godzilla movies, especially the ones that have been made by American studios,
yes,
are the human characters. In my opinion, I don't really go to Godzilla movies for the human characters. I mean, obviously you don't want really bad actors or like really terrible screenwriting for those human-centered scenes. But I mean, honestly, we go to Godzilla movies to see giant kaiju wrecking the place and just, that kind of full-on pure entertainment that you can only get from a movie of that scale.
It's kind of funny that kind of feature pops up with Godzilla films because they tend to have quite large ensemble casts.
They do, yeah.
And I think one of the selling points of this particular iteration is the fact that the cast is really A-list.
Oh, yeah. So you've got like Vera Farmiga in there as a researcher who kind of goes crazy and unleashes a bunch of giant monsters. You've got Millie Bobby Brown from Stranger Things as her daughter. She's kind of the main character of the movie, but that's a bit of a stretch, honestly. Like she's kind of underused, I would say, or wasted.
Of course.
You've got Kyle Chandler as Millie Bobby Brown's character's father, great dad actor. Like he's just, he's always there to just be the all-American guy. Ken Watanabe is back from the 2014 movie. Bradley Whitford, Thomas Middleditch. What's Ice Cube's son's name again?
Ice Cube Jr.? Little Cube? I don't know.
Yeah, Little Cube, whatever. Yeah, O'Shea Jackson Jr., I think maybe.
Right, O'Shea Jackson Jr. Yes, he was in Straight Outta Compton.
Yeah, so he's in there as well as like a military officer, a soldier. What we get essentially is like a movie that picks up right where the first one left off, where the character played by Vera Farmiga, Emma Russell, she loses her elder son in the destruction of San Francisco. And basically, she doesn't go crazy right away, but it clearly like breaks something in her. And so she devotes her academic research to coming up with a gadget that can pacify and control giant monsters. And so she travels the world with this Monarch organization, which is sort of an offshoot of the U.S. military, and brings her daughter, played by Millie Bobby Brown, around with her. She's separated from Kyle Chandler's character. And just as she's about to like sort of crack the secret of this gadget and make it actually work, an eco-terrorist played by Charles Dance, who plays Tywin Lannister on Game of Thrones, he pops up very conveniently, kind of snatches the gadget and snatches Emma Russell and her daughter away. And this just basically is an excuse to find a means to wake up all of the monsters and kick off all of the big destruction that we paid our ticket money to see.
Yeah, so one of the main criticisms about the previous film was that we didn't see enough Godzilla.
Yeah, it clocks in at about 8 minutes of total screen time for Godzilla in the 2014 one.
Yeah, so in this one, I imagine they fixed that.
Because they really don't have the effects budget, I don't think, to have like 90 minutes of Godzilla or whatever the case may be. But it is a longer movie. It's like 2 hours and 10, I believe. And there's a lot of Godzilla. There's a lot of his kind of classic enemies, King Ghidorah, Mothra, Rodan, a bunch of others. So yeah, like in the review that I wrote for the site, I was kind of talking about how the first movie, it trades very heavily in like the sense of dread and like the natural disaster kind of element that Godzilla represents. And it only kind of gives us a little bit of the bombastic creature feature stuff that we'd expect from the franchise. So then this sequel kind of flips that equation and gives us a whole lot more of the kind of creature feature, rumble in the jungle, just all out wrestling matches with cities as the ring, and kind of puts the dread stuff on the back burner.
So it's not unconceivable that if you're just looking for big monsters to fight each other, that you'd really enjoy this film. If you're looking for a sophisticated plot or character development, this probably this movie probably isn't for you.
Yeah, and like this is the kind of movie where like I went to see it with my brother. It was like a 10 o'clock at night type of screening, and you know you're there waiting for Godzilla to power up his atomic breath, and you know you hear this. The filmmakers in the series do this great job where they have this like power up sound, like vroom, 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 and then you know that Godzilla's about to use his nuclear breath, and you're just like, hell yeah, man, hell yeah, go Godzilla. And, you know, if you can get into that mindset where you're like cheering on Godzilla and you want to see him like wreck face, then this is the movie for you.
Is it like a very melodramatic movie throughout, or are there brief moments of levity? Because if you remember back in the original Godzilla or the 2014 Godzilla, it was quite a drawn out dramatic process.
Yeah, there wasn't a lot of humor breaks or anything like that in that 2014 one. You're right. This one definitely has more jokes. A lot of them come courtesy of Bradley Whitford, who some people might remember. You know, he's been a character actor for ages, but he played the dad in Get Out from Jordan Peele a few years ago.
And West Wing too. Yeah,
West Wing. Yeah, a lot of people will know him from there. And he plays this like scientist character who works for Monarch, and a lot of the one-liners kind of come from him because his only job is to basically sit behind a computer and crack wise about stuff. So, you know,
is that more or less lines than Zhang Ziyi?
Yeah. Well, Zhang Ziyi is there. She's clearly been placed there. She plays twins, actually, who are
twice the exposure.
Apparently, the twin characters that she's playing are a reference to similar twins from the original series in Japan.
Oh, the Mothra twins? Ah, interesting.
You have her in there as that, but they don't get hardly any screen time. Yeah. It's really hard to kind of parse out why she's there. If you're being cynical, I mean, basically, she's probably there to increase the marketability in China.
Right. In terms of like the funometer, I feel like Pacific Rim is still the kind of the gold standard. So where does this rank? Where does this stack up? Final thought.
Like Pacific Rim for me is always going to be like the first one, the Guillermo del Toro one is always going to be like a solid 4.5 out of 5, maybe even 5 stars if I'm in the right mood for it. This one is more like 4 stars out of 5, maybe 3.5. Like some of the human characters and the cliches in the dialogue are, you know, they can kind of annoy you after a while, and there's some really silly stuff, but just to see like this much money being thrown at this franchise and making Godzilla and Ghidorah look as good as they do on screen with like these epic looking Monarch bases underwater and like this sunken city sequence and this like flying dreadnought thing that Monarch flies around that's like their command center in the sky. All of that stuff is just super cool to look at. So if you're in the right mood for it, yeah, the funometer is definitely less than the original Pacific Rim, but it's probably higher than the original Godzilla from 2014.
Fair enough. And then the other big release this weekend.
Oh yeah, so you just saw this yesterday. Is that we're going to get into some X-Men here?
Yes.
She should be dead.
Did you hear what the kids are calling you? Phoenix.
Hello, Jean. Who are you? The better question is, who are you?
So, full disclosure, I have like a big soft spot for X-Men. It was just one of my favorite comics growing up. The one thing about Dark Phoenix is that sometimes there comes along a film where even before its release date, people have already written it off for a variety of reasons. I think Dark Phoenix falls in this category. I think the fact that Apocalypse was so poor and the fact that people were so excited about the X-Men moving to the MCU that people, I think, were ready to hate on this film, whether it was good or not. It isn't good by any means, but I think it's really unfortunate that it's gotten the lowest Rotten Tomato score of all the X-Men films, when clearly it's not the worst film. I don't think it is, far from it, I think.
Yeah, like compared to X-Men Origins Wolverine, stuff like that.
Yeah, so that's the gold standard for the shit-o-meter. Like, that movie is really unwatchable for the most part, I think. So, Dark Phoenix, I walked in with mild expectations. This is a remake of The Last Stand, essentially, which was written by Simon Kinberg, who came back to direct this one. So the storyline is basically the same. So Jean Grey, played by Sophie Turner, is this psychic mutant who absorbs this sort of energy, and she's consumed by this power, and there's this alter ego that emerges called the Phoenix from within inside her, and she basically loses control, and a lot of stuff happens, and the X-Men have to control her, and it sets up all sorts of conflict between mutants and the X-Men's role in society. There's an alien race that comes because they're interested in Phoenix, this time played by Jessica Chastain. And yeah, that's basically the gist of it.
So then is this movie, and to be honest, I've only ever seen like most of the original X-Men and then X2. I've never seen anything more than a few clips from the Brett Ratner X-Men The Last Stand, which was the third movie in the series, then the one that previously adapted Dark Phoenix. But is it true that like this movie, you know, one of the kind of core themes is how Professor Xavier, it's kind of about his failure as a teacher in like kind of communicating the great power that Jean Grey / Phoenix has and helping her understand it and put it to good use?
Yes. So that is like a basic conflict in this story, the fight between Jean Grey and Charles Xavier. So basically the story is that Charles Xavier identifies Jean as like a really strong mutant when she was a child. And so in her mind, he puts up all these mental blocks to block out these negative feelings and to basically rein her in so that the negative emotions that she feels doesn't overcome her rational side and unleashes this like really psychotic, murderous mutant inside of her. And so the question is about the X-Men's fight for freedom and Charles Xavier's own hypocrisy in controlling what his students can or cannot do without giving them full agency of their actions. So that's always been the central conflict. And it's much... I think both films hash it out well enough. The problem is that when you have an ensemble film and limited time, character motivations change at a drop of a dime. The plot structure isn't very great. I think the dialogue in this one could use a little more work, but overall it's better than The Last Stand because I think it does a better job of focusing on the characters and focusing on some of the more quieter moments of the film. So if you think back to Brett Ratner, he did The Last Stand and the Rush Hour series. And there are all these like pretty loud, in your face, sort of really aggressive action films. And that's really dialed back a bit. Actually found the performances in this one in Dark Phoenix actually quite good. I thought Sophie Turner was surprisingly good as Jean Grey, actually. And I think because she played Sansa Stark, who like kind of matures from this like really naive character to this like really dark Sansa Stark character, I think really helps her in this regard. But it's just that unfortunately the rest of the cast is kind of like relegated to being set pieces.
Yeah.
So Cyclops and Storm and Nightcrawler kind of show up and do some actiony stuff, but they don't really further the plot or any of the relationships. I think the biggest problem for this one is Jessica Chastain, actually. So she played, yeah. So she's good. Her performance is fine. Very Tilda Swinton-like. A lot of people have said that, but she's basically like this alien who comes to Earth who's really interested in Jean Grey for some reason, but her motivations and her character and her background are never fully explained. And basically this alien race kind of serves no purpose ultimately because you don't know what they're after. Did you ever watch The Last Stand? No. I've seen clips of like, I think I saw the clip of when, spoiler for a movie that's like 10 years old or whatever, when Jean Grey like vaporizes Charles Xavier, because knowing that had happened in The Last Stand makes some of the stuff in later movies more confusing. Like the fact that Xavier is fine and dandy in the beginning of X-Men Days of Future Past. Yeah. So like the fact that they don't have like a Kevin Feige type showrunner really hurts this franchise. I think the lack of structure and plot in Dark Phoenix can be attributed to that. So I don't necessarily think the criticism for Dark Phoenix for lack of coherence is very fair, because that's just pervasive throughout the entire franchise. Yeah. I think The Last Stand, if you watch it now, it holds up a lot better than most people remembered. It's a very generic superhero film at a time when people didn't realize they liked generic superhero films. And X2, which I thought was probably the best film in the series for the longest time, hasn't aged that well, though. Oh, really? Okay. Because it's so slow. It's not an action film. It's a drama film featuring X-Men. Right. So it's kind of like interesting how we rate these movies in retrospect. I think Dark Phoenix is going to be a film where in maybe 5-10 years time, we'll look at it differently, because there are actually 2 action sequences in the film. One involving a fight at Jean Grey's house and another one on the train that are actually, I think, quite well done. Do you think that was
Simon Kinberg, the longtime writer and now first time director, do you think that was him kind of learning from all of the stuff that had come in the franchise before, like stuff that he'd written into previous scripts, and then he was able to kind of synthesize it into something good here?
Well, here's the funny thing. Like, a lot of the problems from The Last Stand are the same problems in Dark Phoenix, where like the characters aren't very interesting. The plot has too many holes. It doesn't make sense. Motivations change on a dime. So in that sense, I think it stays the same. But considering that this is a remake that's come 10 years later, or however many years that is, it's interesting to note what they can do with like CGI these days.
Yeah.
If you look back at the old Singer films, the CGI is very limited, and it's not nearly as effective as it is today. So remember how like in X-Men 2, the Nightcrawler sequence itself took probably like a quarter or half the budget or whatever it was.
Yeah.
But in this one, you see much more of that, and it's easier to recreate, and it just makes it that much more effective. But the storytelling just really falls short.
Oh, yeah. And like, this was also something where apparently Kinberg got to a fairly late stage in production, and then realized that his ending was a little bit too similar to some other Marvel movies that had recently come out. I think Captain Marvel being one of them. And then he had to turn around and, not to say that there's a bit of a myth going around now that if a movie goes into reshoots, it's de facto going to be bad.
Yeah, that's not true.
It's not true. There's lots of giant movies, Avengers being one of them, that need reshoots to kind of go around and fix things before release. But he did have to apparently reshoot the whole third act of this movie. Can you feel that from the way the movie is currently put together?
Not really, because the film is so disjointed. It's hard to say what was original and what was added on. At the same time, that goes to show that like people were prepared to really hate on this movie because of the extent of reshoots they had to do. This isn't like New Mutants, which was filmed like God knows how long ago. The big thing, I think, with the ending is that it's very cliched. It is, even if the ending was written brand new, it must have been a hasty job, because in some ways it's still very much like the ending from the not The Last Stand, but X2, X-Men United.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah, so there's a callback to that. There's obviously a callback to Eric and Charles Xavier playing chess again, even though it's like totally unnecessary in that scene. So it's really tough to say. I will have to say though, I as an X-Men fan, I actually really enjoyed this film. I thought, not really enjoyed, but I don't see the hate. It has an audience score of 65%, which is the same as Apocalypse. And I thought Apocalypse was way worse. I thought Apocalypse was probably as boring as you could get, considering the amount of stakes there are. Like, Apocalypse is one of the X-Men's like main villains. In this one, in the comics, the alien race that Jessica Chastain portrays is a very minor alien race. And the gulf between the critical score and the audience score is like something like 43%.
Yeah.
Which is way bigger than X-Men Origins Wolverine and X-Men Apocalypse. So I think that tells you something there. I actually think that the critics are kind of wrong on this one. I think they're too unnecessarily harsh.
Okay. Do you get a sense at all of like, that a lot of people are saying that the box office on this is going to be pretty disappointing. It may be a big flop for Fox Disney. It would have been a flop for Fox if they were still on their own. But as an X-Men fan, do you get any kind of hint as to what they could do with the franchise next?
Well, I think that's up to Disney. I actually really like this new young cast of team members that they have. I think Sophie Turner, like I said, was really good. I think Ty Sheridan and Alexander Shipp and Cody Smith-McPhee and even Evan Peters, I think they have a screen presence to them. I think it really works for them. I think the casting for these X-Men is better than Bryan Singer's originals, aside from Hugh Jackman, of course.
Yeah.
But I don't know if Disney's going to reboot the whole thing. The X-Men story doesn't really need an entire complete retelling. People are really familiar with it. Just kind of like how Into the Spider-Verse, they didn't really need to explain where Spider-Man came from. They just, you knew right away. So my best hope is that Disney keeps this cast around, and then they rewrite or just write new adventures for them to take on. I don't think it'll include some of the characters, like not all of them may move over, but Fox is done. Like, they really screwed the pooch with this film. It's gonna gross less than X-Men Origins Wolverine, which is, kind of a shame, really, because it's so much better. But it comes at a time when people are jaded by anything not Marvel and just X-Men in general, because things have been so hit or miss. If I could convince you to watch it, I would, Rob.
I mean, I'm not ruling it out. I definitely I watched Days of Future Past. I watched Apocalypse. I briefly thought I might go to see this, but then there was too many other things that were taking my attention, namely Godzilla. But
I will say this though, when you go in to see it, there's like a prologue sequence before the main story kind of takes off. I felt strongly about this, is that they should have taken out the prologue and stuck it somewhere near the end.
Oh,
so that the movie starts off with a rescue mission, and that rescue mission, that sequence alone, I think is actually one of the better sequences that the X-Men have come up with. So there's like redeeming parts, but in general, it's a really like film that's again all over the place because the characters have no conviction.
Right. Yeah. And it feels like the series has been trying to build us up to a point where we see the fully assembled, yellow suit, young X-Men, and we're going to get a bunch of adventures with them, but we never really seem to get there. It's always like being distracted by some major arc that that's been plucked from the comics, but maybe they shouldn't have done that arc right away. Maybe they should have had some in between movies. But yeah, who knows what Disney will do with it? I mean, I could definitely see them blending the X-Men with one of the other super teams out there and having like
Fantastic Four.
Yeah, like Fantastic Four. Like I'm pretty sure there's been a few comic team ups with those two teams before. So yeah, they could do that way. Two birds with one stone.
Speaking of box office failures, I never understood why people are so hung up about this, but I heard Booksmart, which you saw, was really good.
We have to go to a party tonight. What? Nobody knows that we are fun. We didn't party because we wanted to focus on school and get into good colleges. And it worked. But the irresponsible people who partied also got into those colleges.
I'm incredible at hand jobs, but I also got a 1560 on the SATs.
It was really good, yeah. But the discussion over its box office performances kind of mystified me, to be honest.
I agree with you. I don't get it. Why?
People seem to be describing it as a failure, which I don't think it can really be a failure in terms of actual money.
Well, because like I said, X-Men Wolverine Origins is not a success.
I think maybe it was some people expected it to kind of be one of those indie movies that is bought for, whatever it was, like 25 million, 30 million, and make like 10 times that back, like a My Big Fat Greek Wedding, essentially.
Do you think the comparisons to Superbad are maybe unfair?
Yeah, because I mean, Superbad is, first of all, it's a very different story. You've got two high schoolers, played by Michael Cera and Jonah Hill, who are seeking out like a debaucherous night just because they want to, and they think it'll make them cool. But the motivations for the two girls in this are very different, and I think more in line with, it's something that they're getting one free night or one like transgressive night to kind of buck the norm of what they normally do. They end up trying to do the same thing, which is get into a party and like experience that kind of like debaucherous night, but they're doing it for different reasons. Mm-hmm. And so to kind of say that, oh, this is the female Superbad is a little bit simplistic, and I don't think the distributor leaned too heavily on that, but maybe that idea kind of took hold with certain people and they were like, oh yeah, definitely it's going to be a runaway, like huge financial surprise, just like Superbad was. And then it wasn't.
Much has been made about the two leads, Caitlin Dever and
Jonah Hill's sister, Beanie Feldstein.
And how did they turn out?
They're great. Like the chemistry between these two is infectious. Like if you never had a best friend who was this much in sync with you in high school, it almost makes you regret that you didn't, because they just have this like this ability to like sync on the stuff they're into and the way they think, and they really feel like fully realized high schoolers.
Did you never kind of have that experience in high school where like you felt like you had one last opportunity to do something that was totally like out of character or out of your comfort zone?
Well, I didn't know, but I was really boring in high school. I didn't have that kind of motivation at all, but I can definitely I can see where they're coming from, because I was definitely, one of those people who was very focused on his studies in school. And, there's a voice in the back of your head that says like, oh, you could totally, you could get away with like one night where you're not totally in the books.
It's kind of interesting to watch these coming of age high school movies and how much emphasis or thought they give into their post high school careers. I never got that. I never really had a sense of urgency in high school. Did you experience that kind of thing?
Definitely, yeah. I don't know whether it was because like I grew up in a household where both of my parents were like, very academically motivated themselves, and we had books all over the place, and we listened to classical music and jazz and things like that. So I can definitely sympathize with these two girls in this movie, and that kind of buying into that narrative that it's still a thing today, this sense of like,
yes.
if you come out of high school with top marks, get into the best school, your life is going to be decided for you and everything will work out according to some master plan. But of course, as we've seen, you can have like 4 or 5 master's degrees these days and still have difficulty getting a job. So,
depends on what you study.
Exactly. And who and all of that stuff. So
I went to like a preps high school. So like the uniform, AP classes, the whole shebang. I feel like I kind of went through it, but to me, the effect was just magnified 10 times because students and parents are just talking about universities nonstop since like grade 10, even grade 8, which is
right.
Just, by that time, by grade 11 turnaround, I was so burnt out. I didn't care. And I did fine in school. I never got the motivation to be like, oh, I want to go to school X or I want to do this or that. I kind of took things as they came along.
Right.
In that sense, I get it, but it's kind of fun to always see people strive for their goals or do sort of a double take and be like, oh my God, I did this wrong.
That's the kickoff point for this movie. But then it's everything that comes afterwards that really like turns the dial up to 11, because this is Olivia Wilde, the longtime lead actress, character actress. And she's been, on TV, prestige stuff on like cable, but also movies and indies and stuff like that. Tron Legacy was something she did back in the day.
House?
House. She definitely came up on that show. So she's been all over Hollywood and TV land for forever. But this is her directorial debut. And I think she, if I remember correctly, I think she's working from a Blacklist script or a script that had been bouncing around
it is.
Hollywood for a while and was finally produced. And
she had a hard time getting financing for this.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a time in the industry where these kinds of like, you can have the greatest script in the world off of the Blacklist, but people don't really want to take a chance on mid-budget movies anymore because the profit margins just aren't what they used to be.
Can we go on a tangent on that for a second, though? Obviously, the big budget, big studio films are the ones that can really afford to have movies in theaters, and they're the ones that are kind of more beholden to box office performance. So I see a movie like Always Be My Baby, which is, like a mid-budget rom-com that debuted on Netflix. And I wonder if films like Booksmart should go down that path in the future, where films that don't have a big budget, that don't have a big special effects budget, should go straight to streaming because it's so much less costly, and then leave the theaters for the big budget stuff. And maybe if your mid-budget film garners enough interest, then maybe you want to show it in theaters.
Yeah, that's totally the dilemma that all of these filmmakers who are trying to get mid-budget movies made, that's where their heads are at right now, because the financiers who would have come to throw these movies together for a theatrical release back in the day are saying, yeah, we can't make this make sense when we're up against like a multiplex that's got 3 or 4 of its theaters dedicated to Avengers and like two of its theaters dedicated to some other big budget thing.
Yeah.
They're just not moving the tickets as fast as they want. So yeah, if a Netflix or Amazon or Apple or whoever the case may be comes along and they're like, here's $40 million for your movie, we'll just give it to you. You'll make a profit in terms of what you invested, and then we'll blast it out to our huge subscriber base all in one day. There is an argument to be made that's kind of the new way to do things.
Yeah, I mean, like a rom-com, you don't need like freaking AVX or digital surround sound or any of that stuff.
No.
You really don't. I don't know if this is a viable sort of like paradigm shift, because so many critics are like, oh, well, anything on Netflix isn't, a movie per se, so we can't include it in our awards ceremony kind of deal. But I think that should change and will change in the future. So, for example, Amazon is spending like a boatload of money on the Lord of the Rings sort of universe TV series.
Yep.
I wonder if it's just not like more economically viable for them to just like finance like with that $1 billion, like 100 rom-coms, and leave the big budget stuff to the big budget studios.
Yeah.
Like you get more bang for your buck. You get more titles for your library, and it's not like super extensive where it could take years to just like make a film.
Yeah, and that's the argument of like variety in genre and voices versus sameness and franchising, right? It's something that's I'm reading this book now that I've mentioned already on the show. That it's called The Big Picture by a Wall Street Journal reporter, and he's talking about how Sony is kind of the symbolic studio that has suffered the most with this new paradigm shift, where they used to be a studio that was well known for having a huge variety of mid-budget movies, and they would actually make a profit on all of them, and they had a pretty good business model for a while, and then Disney came along.
Yep.
And it wasn't just Disney's fault. It was also like the folks at Sony misreading what was happening and making some bad bets. But basically Disney's success has been, we're not going to make 40 movies a year. We're going to make like 10 movies a year. Mm-hmm. And every one of those 10 is going to make back twice its budget or better. Right. And so they're just, every single one is a home run with them, and they don't want to risk anything on something that may only make like, 5% profit or 10% profit.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's why there's so much pressure on the Star Wars universe and Kathleen Kennedy too. Now that we're going on another tangent, is that like they make increasingly big bets on these Star Wars things.
Yeah.
And for a multitude of reasons, it's like a law of diminishing returns, where it just hasn't had the same success as some of the previous films. And so it'll be interesting to see these studios come at crossroads. But moving on to TV, you've got an eye on Good Omens.
Armageddon is days away, and we've lost the Antichrist. We have to work together.
We have nothing whatsoever in common. I don't even like you.
You do. If we don't find it, it'll be the war to end everything.
Adam, where are we going? The end of the world. It's not far.
Yeah, so I'm a big fan of the Neil Gaiman book that this is based on. It's Neil Gaiman and Terry Pratchett. Terry Pratchett was a fantasy writer. He passed away a few years ago, but he collaborated with Neil Gaiman on this book. It was just a one book. It never turned into a series or anything. And it basically charts the last few days until the end of the world, where a demon from hell and an angel from heaven have been friends on Earth for thousands of years. And then they're kind of like, they kind of like Earth, and they don't want to see it get destroyed in Armageddon. So when the Antichrist pops up to bring about the end of the world, the two of them end up working together to try to avert this and to keep the Earth going a little bit longer. And so you can already tell it's both the book and now the series on Amazon have this very tongue-in-cheek, subversive kind of attitude towards, the religious stuff that has been pervading popular culture, at least for like the past couple thousand years. And they're clearly trying to take a very British dig at those old fashioned ideas.
Campy?
Not campy in that sense of like the Met Gala camp. But definitely lots of wit, lots of banter. You've got David Tennant from Doctor Who and many other projects as the demon Crowley, and Michael Sheen, who people will remember from everything as varied as Twilight to the Woody Allen movie Midnight in Paris. He's in there as the angel Aziraphale. And then you've also got lots of recognizable British actors in there playing various roles. Derek Jacobi as the voice of God. Jack Whitehall, the stand-up comic, as this kind of nervous witch finder named Newton Pulsifer.
That's funny.
And then Frances McDormand is in there actually as the voice of God, as God herself. So you can tell that by making God a woman there, that's another little twist of the screws just to spice things up a bit. It's a lot of fun. It's kind of rewarding as a fan of the book to see it kind of finally adapted after a lot of people trying to get it made for a number of years. But I can't say that the series is 100% successful. It's only 6 episodes, and it feels like it's rushing a lot. There's a few characters who kind of just run headlong into big decisions without you really getting a chance to see them develop their motivation or reach that decision point. They cram a lot of jokes into very tight spaces, and it's got a very Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy kind of vibe, you know, both the book and the series. But I don't know, it feels cramped and it feels rushed, and it's unfortunate because there's a lot of really, really funny stuff in the source material. And I think if maybe they had like an initial 2 episodes or maybe even a total of 10, it would have been able to kind of take some time and breathe a little bit, and you get to know the characters a bit better.
It's interesting that this film is released when it was. I don't know like how long this has been in production, but there's another show called American Gods that deals with like gods and conflict. Do you ever watch that?
I did. I finished the first season of American Gods about a week ago, actually, or 2 weeks ago.
Do they kind of explore the similar ideas? Or
no, I would say like American Gods is definitely more dramatic.
Okay.
It's also based on a book by Neil Gaiman, but
yes,
it's in that same mode of like subverting typical ideas about religion and kind of exploring a different idea of thinking about gods and supernatural beings as more like self-centered and profit-oriented.
Right.
They've got a version of Vulcan, the Roman god of the Forge, who's basically become like the CEO of a gun company. And you've got gods who will just like willingly kill their human subjects just to kind of get a rush from it. And so it's definitely a more, I don't want to say mean-spirited, but it's a little bit more of a critique of religion, or a pointed kind of takedown of religion, in the way that Good Omens is more like just sort of gently poking fun.
Right.
So very, very different versions of the similar kind of motivation.
This criticism or critique of society, I think, is one of those trends in TV that just seems to be gaining momentum, where you have shows examining truth, arguments against both sides, which it's actually like a good segue to bring in Chernobyl.
Oh, yeah.
See, a just world is a sane world. There was nothing sane about Chernobyl.
I'm pleased to report that the situation in Chernobyl is stable. In terms of radiation, I'm told it's the equivalent of a chest x-ray.
Chernobyl is basically a 5-part miniseries produced by HBO, dramatizing and documenting the events of the Chernobyl nuclear disaster, which is now 30 some odd years ago. The main premise of this film is to show that the cost of lies, and how if people aren't informed about the dangers and the reality of things, how mistakes can be made, and how impactful these mistakes can compound and turn into something irreversible. So the film follows this Soviet professor called named Legasov. These are all based on real people, played by Jared Harris. And he, along with the, I think, Minister of Fuel and Energy, Boris Sherbina, played by an excellent Stellan Skarsgård, team up together and try to basically contain the nuclear fallout. This is already, I think, one of, if not the most highly rated, but one of the most highly rated programs, TV shows on IMDb. I would fall short of saying it is the best ever, because I think Band of Brothers is still better. But this 5-part miniseries is fantastic. I can't recommend it enough. It's filmed like a thriller horror picture, sort of like the danger is lurking underneath the whole time type of thriller. And I think what I appreciate most is the authenticity that goes into recreating these events. So the soundtrack using those dosimeters, which detect radiation, as part of the score, with the kind of like a clock where it's ticking all the time and it gets faster and faster and faster when there's pivotal moments. I think that was super well done. I believe the score is made by some sort of Scandinavian composer, but and
oh, okay.
I don't know what they do over there, but they've made some really excellent like scores over the past few years. Very like industrial, very dramatic, very tense. Not unlike, I don't know, heavy metal. Like,
oh, okay. Is there anything else that this composer has worked on recently?
Okay, so the composer is, I'm gonna butcher his name, Hildur Dotir, Icelandic cellist.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And he is, interesting enough, going to score the upcoming Joaquin Phoenix Joker film.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah. So if you want a taste of maybe a preview of what the Joker theme may be like, the trailer itself was like terrifying. So maybe go watch Chernobyl and just use your ears and listen closely in what he does with sound. It is so fantastic. One of the criticisms about this show is that it doesn't really portray the dichotomy of political power between people in the Soviet party. But I think most people are familiar enough with like communism and Soviet Russia to understand what it was like. I think the main takeaway from the show is actually the stoicism that comes from these workers, and the fact that it's based on a true story, and that you have hundreds of thousands of people sacrificing their lives unknowingly or knowingly to prevent the nuclear fallout, I think is quite commendable, especially under the auspices of like communist Russia, where like, you know, the party is above the state kind of deal. This show is going to get nominated for a ton of awards, a ton.
Yeah, and they're only doing like 5 episodes. It's just going to be a limited miniseries.
Yep, it's over. It's the 5th episode wraps it up. It covers the final trial of the 3 engineers that led to the nuclear meltdown, and there's like an epilogue at the end too, because a lot of the characters, except for Emily Mortimer's character, who's like an amalgamation of all these different scientists, they really are pretty thorough with everything. And I think the showrunners made it a point of saying that they didn't just want to throw Soviet Russia under the bus. And of course, Russian news outlets are hating on this show and saying, yeah, it's not true, blah blah blah.
Oh yeah,
but I think if you have a chance, really go for it. It's not a long show, and it covers a lot of ground.
It's interesting that you made the connection between like, the kind of subversion in Good Omens and American Gods, and the kind of the social critique in this movie, because, or this miniseries rather, because that is a really, that's an interesting way to get into it. When you think about the impact that the Soviet Union had upon their satellite countries, and the unwillingness to face facts about a very real disaster that's unfolding.
And just the political environment we're in right now, I think it is so timely in so many ways that I think it elevates the profile of these shows, because there's so much that we can glean from this. I'm not sure if the showrunners meant to do that. They probably didn't predict, Trump or Erdogan or whatever, whoever being president and whatnot. But I think there is a chance that we're going to really skew towards this. We see this in Marvel too, where, and even X-Men, they have lines and scenes in there that are particularly catered towards certain sections and demographics that they feel are underrepresented or undervalued.
So do you think Jared Harris might be in line for Best Actor at the Emmys?
He definitely will, but I actually thought Stellan Skarsgård was better.
Oh, okay.
Legasov is kind of like the straight man in this series. So I think it's easy to play that character because he's the heroic one, really. Sherbina, who is like a party man through and through and eventually comes around. I think that was a more interesting character and role. And I used to not think much of Stellan Skarsgård because he takes all these like weird bit roles in big films, but he was really fantastic in here. Barry Keoghan's in this. Emily Mortimer's great in this as well. There's a bunch of stage actors in here. Paul Ritter as Dyatlov, the chief engineer, who's just like painted as this villain, is excellent. But it also does a very good job of showing that, hey, it's not about this just one guy.
Right. Yeah. It can't be pinned on any one person's mistake. Yeah. And I know that it was funny to be watching HBO the night that Game of Thrones ended, because they were really pressing. They were like, look at all this great stuff that we have coming out. Like we've got Chernobyl's coming up right after this. We've got Big Little Lies season 2. We've got the Watchmen series. Just don't leave us. Don't cancel your subscription, please.
Watchmen is interesting. I actually appreciated Zack Snyder's film. If only because it was like, a shot for shot remake of the comic. But I am interested to see what he does with this. Yeah,
because this is kind of a new or like a spiritual successor in some ways, because it's not redoing what Snyder did in the movie. It seems to be, has it been confirmed? Like, is it a chronological sequel in the sense that it's depicting things that happened after the...
I think so.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Meanwhile, apparently Dr. Manhattan from Watchmen is currently fighting it out with Superman in the pages of DC Comics. In an arc that's called Doomsday Clock, I think.
What? Isn't Doomsday Clock in like an old storyline?
I don't know. They've got a version of Doomsday Clock that's going now, and it's Dr. Manhattan versus Superman, and this whole like Dr. Manhattan trying to figure out the whole business of the DC multiverse, apparently. And
that could be either really good or really bad. I don't know what to think of this.
I just think it's funny that whenever Dr. Manhattan shows up in a DC comic, they seem to be like, it's almost as though they're going out of their way to cover up the fact that he's always naked.
Right.
So
yes.
they only want to show him from like extreme wide shots when he's full frontal to the panel, and otherwise like have a leg or him turned around or something like that.
For the amount of like political criticism that comics can make, it's funny that they censor themselves like that.
Yeah.
Because him not wearing clothes is like him making a political statement as well.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's very much part of like, he's not about any kind of earthly constraints at all. And
Exactly.
So I don't know whether Doomsday Clock is getting good reviews or not, but I found myself reading a wrap up of one of the recent issues, and I was like, oh, weird. Okay. Comics are just as weird as they've always been. All right. Well, I think that about does it for this episode. Head on over to kinetoscope.ca. As always, we've got full-length reviews of the things we've been discussing here on the podcast available for you to read, including a review of Godzilla, King of the Monsters that we posted very recently. We've got our Game of Thrones character endings posts that were posted when the show came to an end there a couple of weeks ago. Jason's review of Pokemon Detective Pikachu. Don't want to miss that.
Dark Phoenix will be up soon.
Dark Phoenix is on the way. Yep. It'll be up there by the time this podcast is up, most likely. But coming to you from Toronto, my name is Robert Snow.
And from Vancouver, my name is Jason Chen. Thank you for listening. We'll talk to you guys next time.